I would like to introduce our speaker tonight. And Robert Chasty is Executive Director of Citizens for East Shore State Parks, an environmental nonprofit in the East Bay dedicated to protecting shoreline open space, habitat, wildlife, and addressing environmental justice and climate change. A 25-year effort by CESP and local communities, elected officials, and multiple organizations led to the creation of McLaughlin East Shore State Park. Robert has served as mayor of Albany and has held numerous public positions in the city. He was president of the Solano Avenue Association. In addition to his environmental and community activism and leadership, Robert heads a Berkeley law firm as a recognized civil litigation attorney. He is named as a super lawyer and has been recognized as top attorney repeatedly in San Francisco Magazine and is named among the National Trial Lawyers Top 100. Robert has been involved in the effort to save Point Molate for 2 decades, working with environmentalists and community members. And on a more personal note, Robert spoke to our environmental concern speaker series more than 10 years ago, around 2007, about the development proposed for the Albany waterfront. Also, when we were talking last week, he told me he was the 2,000-year-old man. And for those of you that might know or might not, it's based on a skit by Mel Brooks, and who was interviewed by Carl Reiner. They jointly presented that. We featured a 2010 photo of Robert and Sylvia McLaughlin. Sylvia McLaughlin, for whom the park was made, was somebody that I knew. She was a member of the League of Women Voters, Berkeley, Albany, and Emeryville. We had various meetings at her home. And she was one of the co-founders with 2 friends of hers of Save the Bay. And so with that, I will turn this over to Robert Chasty, and I'm asking you all to write your questions as they come to you in the chat room, and we will ask them at the end.
And one last thing, please, everyone, turn off your cameras and turn off your microphones if you are not presenting. That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everybody. That was a lovely introduction. I want to thank Candia and Carol and Jeanette for putting this together. Kind of a point of personal privilege regarding the League of Women Voters. My grandmother was a suffragette. She was born in the 1800s and was very active in pushing for women's rights and women's rights to vote. And I grew up in a household, I didn't understand that in our household, it was never even a consideration that women were not an equal partner in every way in society, in a household, in a marriage, in any decision-making of importance. So I always admired the League of Women Voters as an organization that captured and maintained and fostered that spirit of equality. So I'm happy to be here. Regarding the Point Molate issue, it's been a labor of love. Point Molate is a magnificent spot, and Candia, if you could put up slide 2 for me, just so people can see. This is the area where you can see where Point Molate is. There's a peninsula that's called San Pablo Peninsula. On the right side of the peninsula, the east side of the ridge, is the Chevron refinery, and there's a boatyard way up at the end. And on the left side, the chunk that's in the middle on the west side of this peninsula is Point Molate. And the rest of it is land that's pretty much owned by Chevron. And this part has never been developed, largely because of the dangers of having a refinery there. And it's not a feasible place to do normal housing and things like that. So anybody who's looked at it and gone out there and seen what the this site can do and what it does for the environment gets awed by it. You'll see, we were out there the other day, you'll see it's not an unusual sight to see osprey, but you'll also see bald eagles out there, and you'll see other kinds of wildlife. It's got probably the last intact watershed that takes fresh water from a ridge and down a hillside into the bay. And partially because of that, if you'll see that slide, you'll see kind of little dark marks in the water just near where the land is, right in the center. That's eelgrass. And there are about 112 acres of eelgrass out there. It's the best eelgrass in San Francisco Bay. It may be the best eelgrass in the state of California. And according to Dr. Catherine Boyer of the institute that studies this, there are multiple studies going on about the effectiveness of eelgrass in combating climate change and sequestering carbon. And this eelgrass itself is in both national and international studies. This is amazing. And it's used as a donor site when other eelgrass beds fail because of ruined by development or some other reasons. They take the healthy eelgrass plugs from here, and those are the ones that are going to be most likely to succeed when they do an eelgrass transplant. So it's a very important part of what motivates people to protect this. And the site's about 417 acres or 415 acres. About 120 of that is underwater and 270 or so is above water. And the part that you can see in the hills there is 270. You'll see to the right, there's what appears to be some gray area in development. The Point Molate ends at what appears to be that ridge road on the right side, and Point Molate ends just past where that little development looking area is on the left side of the slide. That's the extent of Point Molate. The history of this has been fraught with shifts in political winds in Richmond. Richmond is a very active political community. It makes Berkeley look like Quakers in terms of the way they go at you in Richmond. The way it happens in Richmond is there have been some very wide swings. So one thing we did when I first got involved with Point Molate back in around 2004 or so, we tried to see if we could figure how to make Richmond a better place and a safer place and a wealthier place, and also help them have this gift of this magnificent park. And we came to the city of Richmond with the first $80 million deal. When I say we, I'm talking about Citizens for East Shore Parks. And as was mentioned by Carol, Citizens for East Shore Parks is the organization that fought for so many years to get the East Shore State Park, and then later name it after Sylvia McLaughlin, who was both the founder of Save the Bay and also one of the founders of Citizens for East Shore Parks. And in basically what we did was we worked with Chevron, which is the refinery over the ridge. It's on the east side of the San Pablo Peninsula. And Chevron was willing to put up eventually up to $80 million to the city of Richmond, and then gift that to the city of Richmond and have the city of Richmond take the land and put it and link it up with the East Bay Regional Park District and turn it into a park. The city would have gotten the park, $80 million, and then Chevron was also going to do a number of other benefits for the city, including incubator spaces and some things that would have generated money for the city with regard to other kinds of industry or commerce elsewhere. And they're also going to allow the city to allow preservationists to work on that little landmass that's just to the north there. There's a bunch of little buildings in the drawing, if you would. Those reflect what's called Winehaven. And Winehaven, at one point before Prohibition, Winehaven was the largest wine exporting location in the United States. I believe that's correct. If not the United States, it was certainly in California. And it happened after the '06 earthquake. This was where the wineries all set up. And because of the boat access, and there was no real rail that you could count on in those days, so things went by ship. This was an easy way. You're out of the way. You're in a secluded and sheltered harbor. So, you have the advantage of the San Francisco Bay estuary. And that Winehaven building basically shipped wine all over the world. It was an amazingly busy and productive winery, and not so much growing the grapes, but in processing and shipping the grapes that were taken to it. And it stopped because of prohibition. And after that, by then, the other kinds of solutions to shipping and growing wine and how to deal with it post-prohibition took over, and it declined, and that was the end of that. But there are sacred sites, Ohlone sacred sites out there, a number of them, shell mounds, and there's been another one that's just been, we believe, just been uncovered through non-intrusive, you might say, like, if you can imagine using submarine technology to penetrate the earth and see where you'd find the bones, they're able to do that now without doing digs. So there's that. There was a Chinese shrimp camp there, right there near the Winehaven village. And no, I'm sorry, I take it. It was kind of south of there. The Chinese shrimp camp was in the main part of Point Molate. And it has, the vestiges of that are still there. You can still find where it was. This place was a very popular spot for African Americans because it was out of the way. And during the Jim Crow days, although California didn't have official Jim Crow as we know it, there were lots of reasons why African Americans felt more secure and comfortable in a place where
Hey,
there weren't a lot
Can I
of
call
other
you
people.
back?
Sure.
Could we
Because
have
I'm
people,
watching a presentation.
can we have people mute, please?
It's not important. I just wanted to talk about walking. So call me when you can.
Okay, bye.
So,
Please mute everyone but the speaker. Thank you.
So in any event, as we basically approached World War II, the Navy took over the area, and they used it for a fuel depot exchange. So that basically it was a refueling depot. And the Navy, for those of you who are not 2,000 years old like I am, the Navy basically took over a number of places along the shoreline. They took over where Golden Gate Fields is, slightly down the shoreline in Albany, and the Navy was a big presence in the Bay during World War II. This was a Navy location, and because of that, you'll see a lot of fuel tanks still there. Not Chevrons, but they were Navy tanks. All the ones over the hill are Chevrons. And then as basically the Navy kept the site as a military site up until around the Clinton years. And in Clinton times, there was a move to take all of these surplus, you might call them, military sites, and to return them to the public. And there was what's called the BRAC process, and that happened to Point Molate. And there was a study, if you would, a group brought together to figure out what to do with it. And there were a lot of ideas that came out of that. But from that grew the awareness of a large part of Richmond that this would be a spectacular park. It would be much better used as a park, and then do a preservation restoration in the Winehaven Village and go ahead and have the Winehaven Village be used for commercial uses and perhaps a hotel and conference center. And there's some other very creative ideas that have come up, and I won't try to go through all of them because we don't have that much time tonight, but I can tell you that there have been a lot of creative ideas for what to do with Winehaven, including one by the president of CES, Shirley Dean. She was suggesting that we could do a Monterey Bay Aquarium North, if you would, to associate with the Monterey Bay Aquarium and have something like that. But in any event, most of the emphasis has been to make that an economic and regional draw, and that would be accompanied by everything south of it being a park. And there is a great possibility for putting in some world-class playing fields in part of it. And there have been lots of people in the community, including Tony Wright, who runs a soccer league, that we could make this a draw for having regional playoffs for soccer and other types of games. So anyway, there's lots of interest in the community to do this. And I just want to talk about one thing that's not happening here that would happen elsewhere. And I hope I don't offend when I say this, but Richmond is an 80% non-white community. And if this were a white community, this already would have been a park. It's because of what I consider insensitivity, racial injustice, lack of environmental justice, that people think that it's okay to have a refinery, but not necessarily a park. And this is public land and it should stay in public hands. And the current proposal for development of this site that the mayor, Tom Butt, has been pushing is to have this site developed as a luxury housing enclave, basically taking it out of public hands and privatizing it in such a way that the citizens of Richmond will never get to use it. And it's a travesty. And beyond that, there are a number of very serious problems with that, which will let me segue into the issue of the lawsuits. There've been about 5 or 6 lawsuits over this already. 3 of them are active at the moment. Citizens for East Shore Parks has been involved in almost all of them. And we are joined by numerous community groups, the typical ones you'd expect, like the Sierra Club or Spaldef or the Golden Gate Audubon and the California Native Plant Society, those environmental groups, but neighborhood groups, groups that care about soccer, groups that care about having access to this as a park, cycling groups. They're all out there trying to push to make this a place where people can go. Richmond Rides is a supporter of ours, and that's a inner city cycling group that goes out to Point Molate and thinks it's a spectacular place to take kids. And we think so too. So anyway, if I could, in response to, and in part of the planning process, but also in response to the city's move and under the leadership of the mayor to try to take this away from the public and turn it into a luxury housing enclave, we did a community plan, and that's what you're looking at here. And if we go to slide number 1. So we all, and I say we, I truly want to talk about this as the Point Molate Alliance, which is an umbrella group for all the community groups and environmental groups that care about and love this site and want to see that this as something better. And this is the chance for Richmond to do something great. And so if we go to the second slide, you can see this is the concept of the community plan. It leaves the watershed intact, and it leaves the open space intact as a park. And then you can see over in Winehaven, it leaves room for that to be done as a restoration site with commercial development that could help Richmond and would provide jobs and income and be a regional attraction, be a draw. And there are lots of ideas about how to do that. And restoration advocates have come in with many ideas. And I won't spend the time on those because the most of what we're talking about here, next slide, is about what we want to do. So every community aspiring to quality of life creates spectacular open spaces. And this community has a rare opportunity to redo its waterfront, getting a second chance to ensure public ownership of our shoreline. Having this miraculous second chance now, Richmond can protect Point Molate for the public, create a world-class park, and restore the historic Winehaven village. So let's plan this right. And let's not be rushed into development that will forever preclude recovering our waterfront for the people of Richmond and for generations to come after us. Next. Once again, the same site, you can see a little bit more clearly the possibilities that there are for the restoration over in Winehaven. Next. So the community plan is the best legacy we can give to our children and our children's children. A shoreline park resplendent with wildlife, waterfront relaxation, and recreation. A restored Winehaven village and access for all Richmond. You can even see the magnificent purple-looking eelgrass in the bay in this photo, so essential to our fish and birds to thrive. Much of this fabulous habitat would be destroyed by the housing plan by the developers. When California is built out from here to Reno, your grandchildren will be proud that you preserved Point Molate for people and for nature. We can take the time to plan this right. The community has that power and that choice. Next. So this is if we go back one, that'll give you a sense of just blocking out the area. When this was done, the city hadn't presented its plan, but the areas that they were talking about building would be like that. And it'll give you a sense of how much building. In fact, it turned out to be a bigger footprint than what we even guessed. It was worse. It does more to absorb all the public space than we feared it might. Next slide. So the shaded areas are where the city wants developers to build the private housing. And the small pro-development faction wants large housing complexes at Point Molate, privatizing the public shoreline for profit. Pro-developers use the threat of a lawsuit to frighten the city council into settling with the developer to sell off Point Molate for development, splitting the profits 50-50 between the developer and the city of Richmond. And the developer that we're talking about in that paragraph is not the current developer that has submitted a plan. That's a later developer. This one, the first one, is the casino developer. And I'll take a moment to describe what happened with the casino fight. Around the time that we put together the first $80 million deal, it was killed by then council member Tom Butt and his pro-casino allies because they wanted to build a casino out there. And eventually we sued and other people sued, and the city itself put an initiative on the ballot, and the citizenry voted overwhelmingly against having a casino. And they just simply didn't want that use to happen in Richmond and to take this site away from them for that purpose. So as a result, there was litigation between the casino developers and the city. The casino developers wanted their money back because they had spent millions of dollars securing those rights, and the city and the developer ended up in litigation. Well, anyway, let me just continue reading. So that the settlement they came up with was they would develop the site and split it 50-50. Now, you understand, usually in these sites, in these negotiations to settle something, you have one side that wants one thing and another side that wants something else. But in this case, because the mayor at that point was Tom Butt had become mayor, because he was mayor, he inserted himself into the settlement discussions. And basically, he wanted development and the casino developers wanted development. And so, of course, they came up with a plan to develop the crap out of the place. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be crude, but that's what happened. So to make this work, the residents of Richmond will ultimately be on the hook for the 100 to 130 million in site infrastructure costs before the developer can build out the site, plus be on the hook for ongoing substantial costs to operate. In other words, this will be a money loser for Richmond. The estimates we put in here are conservative. More realistic estimates are that there may be 300 to 500 million dollars ultimately in infrastructure costs that need to be raised. And in order to do that, they have to put in a lot of buildings. And even then, those buildings will not pay for the 24/7 fire station they have to build and staff on site. The pro-development faction thinks this is the answer to Richmond's problems, to develop the Richmond shoreline with expensive housing, to gift Point Molate away for housing development for the wealthy. They are making non-enforceable promises of low and moderate income housing at Point Molate to persuade the city council to vote for this giveaway of public lands. And in fact, it finally came out that they were not going to do any low-income housing there at all. Next slide. So this is the vision of what we want. Next slide. The best plan for Point Molate is the community plan. It's based on what the community requested at the city workshops. Despite pressure by city consultants to include housing, most participants in these city workshops stated their strong opposition to housing at Point Molate, wanting housing to be moved downtown where there's already infrastructure for it and where there's a big need for it. At the city's charrette event, even when the city consultants required participants to include at least 670 units of housing in the plans that the participants created, most participants objected to the housing, did not want housing, and begrudgingly only included the 670 units of housing under protest. Plus, they kept housing out of the southern end of Point Molate. The notable exception was Mayor Butt's son, who participated. He was a planning commissioner, Andrew Butt, and the group he led at the charrette produced a plan for approximately 900 housing units, mostly in the south end in the watershed. Ignoring this critical community input, the consultants were directed to create these two privatizing plans and that will maximize housing, plans A and B being presented to the Planning Commission. At that time, they were still in the planning stages. Later on, they approved the plan. Next slide. The community plan calls for, and that was the third of the plans that the city considered. And they only did it because they felt without it, the EIR would be woefully poorly done. So the community plan calls for open space at Point Molate to be park, calls for playing fields, for watercraft recreation, cycling opportunities, picnic places, camping locations, hiking and preservation of the eelgrass beds and natural habitat at Point Molate. And it calls for the public beach to be open and made more gorgeous, for the restoration of the historic Winehaven village with full amenities, restaurants, a hotel, conference center, education facility, and other business and job generators. It calls for moving the housing to downtown and for a thoughtful, open process to create a legacy for future generations. Next slide. Once again, and we can skip to the next slide. There's an example of the kinds of uses that you can have at Point Molate. And these are community people out there on the Richmond shoreline. This shot is taken slightly north of Point Molate, but it's the same idea. Next slide. And by the way, that was a group of people who were learning how to kayak, and the guy in the water, can we go back a slide? The guy in the water was teaching the kids how to do kayaking. He was doing a great job. Anyway, next slide. So having a world-class beach and park is for everyone. Teaching kids, teens to use the bay and respect it instills confidence and a sense of adventure. Next. So just a point of personal privilege. I thought this kid was so much fun to watch learning how to do kayaking, and his mom was so great. I couldn't help but stick the slide in. I'm sorry, I just love the shot. Next. So Richmond loves its shoreline. The people go out to the beach. They love the place. Our kids love the beach and love the challenges. We can have this at Point Molate if we want it. Next. So this is what it looks like. Now I have to confess, this was done with an iPhone, and iPhones don't capture real depth of field very well. It's much, much deeper than it looks. It takes you a half hour to walk from the road up to the top of that ridge. So that'll give you a sense of it. That's what it kind of looked like the day that I took the shot. Next. Looking east from the beach, the slide shows the view from the beach from the west side of, in other words, you're on the west side of the site right near the water. You're west of Stenmark Drive, and you look up eastward at the hills. What you do not see is how this crucial watershed coming down this hill interacts with the hillside slopes, draining into the eel beds and nourishing them. The watershed forms one of the most important ecological systems in the bay, and severe damage will be done to this watershed and to the eelgrass if the developers are allowed to culvert the water instead. Next. So before the developer submitted his plans, we knew they wanted to do 1,000 units of housing or so. And this is kind of what it would look like if you just plunked in all of that housing. Just now you're looking at the same shot, but imagine with a bunch of housing. Next. The housing shown in this slide contains 4-story buildings, 3 stories over a garage. The consultants are actually proposing 6-story buildings. At one point they were, plus commercial and other development for the new residents. We will lose the opportunity for a world-class park owned by the public if we are stampeded into approving housing development, privatized for the wealthy, turning over Point Molate to developers for yet another gated community. Next. So that's another shot. That's taking, you see the crescent of Point Molate there, and the far end of it, that's the point itself. You're at the south end looking north. Next. So uniquely situated along San Francisco Bay, Point Molate is the stellar location for a park. Richmond can best provide for its housing in the downtown and other appropriate sites with valuable infrastructure already in place. This will ensure the success of mixed, low, moderate, and high-income housing within our diverse community. Next. So here's what it might look like if you were to put that housing in. Again, that's the shot looking north, and you see the housing down in the flat area of the hill. That's what would happen. One of the other things we point out here is you'll see the narrow road, Stenmark Drive. If you put, and now they're proposing to put anywhere from 1,400 to 2,000 units of housing, that would produce maybe 4,000 people trying to escape in the event of a fire. And I'll talk about fire in a minute. But you'll see that narrow road. Remember that, imagine 4,000 people in their cars trying to get out. And where those cars are led to in order to escape Point Molate, if a fire were to start, they would be led to the narrow point, which we'll see again in one of the later slides. The narrow point out of Point Molate goes right by the refinery works. And it doesn't go into a variety of choices of streets. It ends up only, you have the only choice you have is to get onto 580 freeway, right where it's coming into the Richmond Bridge. That area now is oftentimes backed up and stopped. So even if it were a few cars, they'd have trouble getting out. But imagine 2,000 cars trying to get out at the same time, and it would be just gridlock. Not only could they not get out, but the emergency vehicles trying to get in to do the rescue work would not be able to get in. It'd be gridlocked. This is one of the major flaws in the EIR study and in the city's ignoring of this fire danger. Next slide. So this talks about what I just said. Evacuation is almost impossible in the event of an explosion, fire, or fumes at the adjacent oil refinery, making this an extremely dangerous site for housing development. Realistically, there's no way out in an emergency. Stenmark Drive is the only way in and out, and it'll turn into a parking lot. On top of that, the residents of Richmond will face double liabilities. They will be saddled with the risks of the infrastructure costs, and maybe even liability for the siting of high-density housing in such an obviously dangerous location. The double liability will dwarf whatever the costs of settling the developer lawsuit might be. Go ahead, next. So that's another sample of what the housing might have been. It looks equally or worse with the real plan. Next slide. So we cannot have both a great park and a huge housing development at Point Molate. The sheer size and impact of this huge development proposal will both destroy the natural ecological balance of the site and overwhelm the remaining open space. Any open space will be perceived more like front, side, and backyards of the housing plan than the park. Park seekers will be treated like intruders. This slide accurately shows the enormous development footprint that will eat up the public's open space. And this view shows how much of the land the development will privatize if 1,100 housing units are allowed. Next. And this just gives you a list of the various possible configurations they might choose. This was before they actually submitted the development plan, but it really doesn't matter. In order to shoehorn 1,400 housing units into that place, they have to take up the space. Next. So this just describes, we use two different sizes of buildings, but it doesn't matter. You've seen the footprint. Next slide. So the community plan, next slide. So we can have the community plan, and the community plan will allow the revitalization of Winehaven, restoring the historic buildings to commercial use, adding a hotel and conference center. And what we show in the slide we did was a footprint of what a Sheraton Four Points would look like in that location, 153 rooms, plus an educational facility, all with a bustling village, moving downtown, housing downtown, while creating an extraordinary public park. And there's too many details to walk through to go through now, but we need to have the input from the entire community, not just Mayor Butt and his very small coterie of people that want his plan. So let's have the conversation to protect the park and open space for the public and provide the economic and job creating uses at the restored Winehaven Village. And also to protect the kinds of sacred sites the Olonis have. This is a major site for the Olonis to protect, and we need to step up and see that they get the proper consideration to do this. So let's avoid the mistake of privatizing this public treasure. The fight for the community plan is far from over. Next slide. So adopt the community plan, zone the South Valley and Bluffs for parkland. This is what we wanted the city to do. Parkland and recreation, a public resource for all residents. Zone Winehaven as a commercial and historical area. Zone to encourage preservation of the historic sites, development of economic enterprises, including hotel, education center, and restrict the zoning at Point Molate such that the housing will be removed to downtown. Plan responsible housing development in Richmond, especially including affordable housing where infrastructure, transit, community services, and businesses already exist. Next. And we're closing with this. This is the legacy that we can leave our kids and grandkids, and we need to be prepared for that. Next slide. And I close with the community plan. I'll just leave that slide up for a minute and say that if you'll notice, the eelgrass on both sides of the point, which actually sticks out, is so critical. One of the advantages of this particular site, which makes it possibly unique or certainly one of the very rare sites where this can happen, is that eelgrass is so healthy that as sea rises slowly, it can migrate upland. And if we plan for that, we can protect this eelgrass as we go, maintaining and encouraging habitat preservation and restoration. So we need to do this. We need to be able to act smartly because we're facing major climate change. And if we can't do this here in Richmond, this is the Bay Area. If we can't do something like here to protect our sheltered lands, where can we do it? This is the local that now attaches to the global. And right now we have both the federal level, recognizing climate change as the serious challenge of our generation, and not just our generation, of our future. And we have that being done at the state level. And both of them are talking about preserving 30% of our lands and protecting our shorelines. So there's federal and state money coming. There's also foundation money. Foundations feel an affinity to this. And we've been out talking to them about raising the money to help us settle these lawsuits and turn this into a park. And they've reflected on the fact that the issue of economic justice and inequities in our society are addressed by sites like these. We can at least start the process of healing by protecting sites like these. And it's imperative that we do that. We do that for this community that is deserving and is doing something not only for our ecology and our planet, but doing something right for a community that is meritorious and has been underparked and underserved. So that's basically where we are. The lawsuits, we can take this down, I think. So I see we got a picture. That's a great picture, Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. The lawsuits, I've been lucky. I'm one of the lawyers, not the only lawyer. I've been joined by two other brilliant lawyers, Norman LaForce and Stuart Flashman, who has himself won a lot of sequel lawsuits, and Norman, who's a bulldog in litigation. He's just great. And we've also been joined by Steve Volker and the commercial fishermen and crabbers have joined in as well. So everybody understands this is a fight for the ecology of the Bay. This is not just an issue of, well, why don't we just let them build a few houses? It's not a few houses. They're going to destroy an ecological system that functions well and destroy the best eelgrass beds in San Francisco Bay. And we can't let it happen. And I guess, I'm not sure if people want to know about all the litigation. There are 3 active lawsuits ongoing right now over the very, very poor environmental study and the city's willingness to waive intractable problems just because they're hoping to get economic benefit. They refused, the mayor refused to allow us to bring in 2 independent economists, both of whom pointed out that this project will lose money for the city of Richmond because of the dangers, because of the limitations, and because there's no infrastructure out there. There's no infrastructure for all this. They're going to have to build the infrastructure of a mini city in order to put these houses. It's sprawl of the worst kind. And while Richmond has lots of land and has a need for working class people who are average folks to be able to buy a home or to rent a home even, and for low income and moderate income people, none of this is designed to address that. Richmond's average income is maybe $60,000 on a good year per household. In order to qualify for any of these units, you need to have an income well in excess of $200,000 a year. This is not being built for Richmond. This is being built for, professional people to be brought in and give them the shoreline and have the people who live in Richmond not have the shoreline. This is racism. I don't know what else to call it. It's bad. So we hope that we're going to prevail. We think we're going to get some help. We've been joined by the Ohlone. We've been joined by lots of community groups, housing advocates, and this is a fight of our time. This is a kind of a statement that defines who we are as a society and what we're willing to do and how we allocate our resources and our money and share to make things equitable. And I'll stop with that.
I'll start by looking at a couple of the chats that might be interesting for you to field. With the global climate crisis is likely to make much of this inaccessible, which will be a local catastrophe, especially if massive development is allowed. Yeah,
that's an interesting observation. I don't know, it depends on who you listen to and what numbers you're using. NOAA, which I'm sure most of you know, it's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's the federal body that talks about all of these kinds of issues like sea rise and so on. And about 10 years ago, they predicted, maybe it was not quite 10, but close to that. They predicted that if things go poorly, that we'll have 10.5 feet of sea rise. Well, as you all know, things have been going poorly. We haven't been able to get a handle on this and things are getting worse. So what's important about this is that we might be facing 10.5 feet by the end of the century. If that happens, our whole shoreline will look different. We'll certainly lose stretches, miles of freeway. We'll lose all the airports in the Bay Area. Point Molate will not be underwater because the San Pablo Peninsula has a very, very high ridge. Parts of Point Molate will be underwater. And we have a challenge as a society, which is why the Biden administration is doing this. And it's why the new city majority in the city council of Richmond, and the citizens are elected a new majority, partially on the basis of their position to reverse all of this development nonsense and giving away the shoreline to develop for the wealthy and to start protecting the shoreline. So I think that what you have is, it could be trapped, maybe not, but a bigger danger is that for those of you who follow, refineries have regular fires and regular explosions and regular gas leaks and regular flaring. This happens all the time. And as we all know, the governor has now announced that we no longer have fire season. Not that we've done away with it, but that fire season is now all year round. So we now have a problem that is getting worse and appears to be escalating. So the idea that we won't have dangerous fires is belied by all of the facts that have been happening with fires at all of the refineries in the state of California.
There's also, can I say one more, Carol? There was a discussion, I think it was Sophie Hahn, I'm not sure if I remember exactly, one of our meetings in the past, that the likelihood of them being able to do an adequate job of dealing with the waste products of these communities they're building is very, very slight, very minimal, that they'll be able to do it properly.
Yeah, that is a good point to make.
I was going to repeat a few comments that were made here on the chat. They're not really questions, but you might want to comment on them. One was, it says, recall that Chevron forced the model train museum to move due to potential terrorist possibilities. The model train had been there for many decades and included a number of actual decommissioned engines and cars. And then there's, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, it's a great point, and it stands on its own. I don't need to comment on it itself, but it also highlights the fact that one of the reasons that the first $80 million deal that was offered to the city of Richmond came with $80 million of Chevron dollars, the reason being that they didn't want a housing project next to them. They simply felt it was too dangerous and it was going to create conflicts that would be unavoidable and harms that couldn't be. Every time there's an explosion or a major gas leak at Chevron or poisonous leak, people end up in the emergency room and they just don't want it. So yeah, the ditto for that point.
And then another point that was made was that there's a torpedo factory in Alexandria. There was a torpedo factory in Alexandria, Virginia, that was turned over to the arts community, creating a world-class tourist destination and economic engine for that area.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And buildings could be repurposed in a similar fashion. So why is you thinking of it as a hotel and convention center rather than an arts community?
Well, we'd be fine turning it over to an arts community. We don't have a real oar in that race. But one thing I would say, there's always been the desire to preserve the buildings and to generate some economic interest. And there's a lot of space out there. And so the hotel would enhance the possibility of having a conference center. We're agnostic about that, if that's what people want. I think the more important point, and I think what the new majority on the city council is saying, is that we need to bring the people into this conversation and stop cramming this down from the developers. This is an opportunity for the people to help choose what happens to their future. I saw in the chat, somebody asked the question is, what responsibility does the city have to the casino developers? That's a good point. I mean, one of the lawsuits involves the lawsuit between the tribe that was seeking to get Indian gaming, the Gettyville tribe of Pomos, and the developer upstream. And that was the lawsuit that led to a secret settlement engineered by Mayor Butt. And it eventually was, as settlements are in federal cases, you go to the judge and say, we have a settlement, Your Honor, can we reduce it to a judgment for the record? The judge makes no determination. They just allow it to be turned into a judgment. But that judgment was later modified because of a lawsuit we brought because of the Brown Act violations. Straight up, doing it in secret is illegal. And even the federal judge said, she just rolled her eyes and said, you got to cross your eyes and cross your T's and dot your I's, gentlemen. But anyway, the point of that is that that is a judgment. And that is not going to be overturned. And so there's an obligation for the city to address the needs of that judgment and to address some of the things that happen. Now, there's an appeal of that case. And if we win the appeal, that judgment is out the window. And what you have then is the original lawsuit between the upstream casino developers and the Gettyville casino developers for their interest. But in any event, that litigation doesn't go away. There is some obligation for the city to contend with and address that and get it resolved one way or another. That's the status of that. You know, I've seen two things. There are a couple of websites, if I could bring them up. I don't know if you have them, but there's a Point Molate website. There's a CESP website. Let me get them up. Yeah, so just so people know. So there's a website called www.ptmolatealliance.org. That's MOLATEALLIANCE. And I think that somebody, oh yeah, Jeannie Quartz just put it in the chat. And then there's another one for CESP, which is www.eastshorepark.org. And you can reach the CESP by email if you're interested, cespmanager@eastshorepark.org. And then the Richmond Shoreline Alliance is another one. I don't want to confuse it. That's enough information for the moment, but we're also fighting to protect the shoreline from, everybody's heard of AstraZeneca. That's a pharmaceutical company that's trying to, unsuccessfully so far, but trying to get a vaccine approved for COVID. They own a site that was for 100 years used as a dump site for toxic materials, both for Zeneca and for Stauffer Chemical. And it's highly polluted, and it's next to another site that has radioactive material dumped into it. And this sounds like I'm making this up, but they are proposing not to take the stuff out, but to build housing on top of it, middle-class housing on top of it. And the site is not a sealed site, so there's already water intrusion. And as we get to higher levels of water intrusion with sea rise and higher levels of water levels rising, because there's no place for the water from the hills to escape, all of that toxic soup will be mixed together and create a volatile compound where there are already volatile organics and TCE, and there are over 100 chemicals. And we're fighting that as well. So Mayor Butt's batting 0 for 0 in terms of protecting the community and in terms of doing stupid things for developers on the Richmond shoreline.
Where is that site?
It's south of Point Molate. It's on the South Richmond shoreline, and we'll have to come back and talk about it later. But
Okay.
right now, let's stay on where we are. It's enough to handle Point Molate.
Yeah.
By the way, we have a lawsuit filed in that case as well.
There's a special, there's a special session of the Richmond City Council tomorrow. Is there something about Point Molate on the agenda? That's a question we got.
You know what? I don't know. There usually is almost every time, but oftentimes it's in closed session because of the litigation. So that's one of the exceptions to the Brown Act that they're legally entitled to do, meet in closed session and deal with the litigation. I would also mention, in terms of litigants, we are on the side of Richmond. We represent tons of community groups, including representatives of the First Nation, the Native Americans, and we're not trying to bring a harm or a damage to the city of Richmond. We're trying to facilitate what the community wants. We don't want any money for it. We're not looking to make, basically we want this to happen the right way.
It says here there is now a lovely bike path that is part of the Bay Trail and accesses Point Molate.
Yeah, they haven't finished all of the things that need to happen out there in terms of the Bay Trail. For those of you who don't know the history of the Bay Trail, when Bill Lockyer was an assemblyman and later a senator, he just heard all these people talking about shoreline trails, and he said, why don't we just do a Bay Trail, ring the entire bay? And the idea just caught fire. And so ever since then, we've been doing that all over. And one of the things that people may not know, but Richmond has 32 miles of shoreline. It's got more, I mean, you consider the Berkeley and the Albany shoreline. This is an amazing amount of shoreline. And so we should have trail all the way around it. And once you put in a park, you get trail. So trails are important, but let's not let the tail wag the dog. And there are great trails out at Point Molate. That's one of the reasons why Richmond Rides likes to take the kids out there, because they're just great bike trails and great places to ride.
trying to go through the list here. Is there anything else that looks interesting, Carol?
Yeah, is there any way to make this a national seashore?
Yeah, well, you know, it was national land. It was Navy land, and it was divested to the public. And the city of Richmond got it for $1. So it is a possibility that we could go back to Congress and see, maybe go to the administration and see if they would turn this into a monument, or like what happened to GGNRA across the bay. We had Senator Feinstein and Senator Boxer and Congresswoman Pelosi all fighting to get that land protected. So we could do that here in Richmond.
Says, where does Chevron stand on the development versus park issue now?
I think Chevron has felt that it hasn't had much success in guiding Richmond into whatever it wants. In the past, it had much more influence. Now it's taken a more backseat role. They were very much in favor of one or two of the candidates in the interim between when the casino failed and there was there was an election. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds about all that, but I don't believe Chevron ever wants to see housing out there, at least in the conversations I've had with Chevron. But they're taking a wait and see, and in a way, I guess they're hoping we'll win. We would love to see them step up and actually help fund some of this. I think they should, but at the moment, they're stepping back.
Do they have a long-term plan for how long they expect to be able to be using the site there if our access to oil and such decline?
You're talking about Chevron's plans?
Yeah.
Well, I'm not privy to their plans, but I know that oil companies they're almost like small countries. They take the long view. When the entire Republican Party was denying that there was climate change, the oil companies were up there exploring how they might be able to change their sea routes because of new pathways through the Arctic. And they're looking up there to lock up opportunities for oil drilling in the Arctic. They take a very long view, and some of them are already trying to figure out how to transition into non-fossil fuels. But I think it's fair to say for the time being, the oil companies would love to be able to get their product out of the ground and sell it.
Yep.
Has Congressman DeSaulnier been asked for his support?
We've reached out to him, and we're waiting to hear back. He's at the moment checking to see if there's any issue about his participation or involvement because of there's a prohibition for Congress people to get directly involved in litigation. We don't wish him to step in and get involved in the litigation. We just think that he could help take a look at how to create a solution for the community of Richmond.
So somebody suggests that the whole coast of California is a national monument and that the bay is included and is under the Bureau of Land Management. Somehow it doesn't sound familiar.
Somebody suggests that's the current status?
Yeah.
Wow, elect that person president immediately.
Well, we have the California Coastal Commission that is still trying to keep the coasts for humans.
Yeah, there's jurisdiction over anything that happens along the coast by the California Coastal Commission. And that jurisdiction is sort of mirrored or duplicated by base.DC, Bay Development and Conservation Commission, inside the bay. So you have outside the bay is the Coastal Commission, the California Coastal Commission, and inside the bay is base.DC, but the jurisdiction is fairly limited. It doesn't cover, for example, base.DC goes 100 feet. Now, if you're bleeding pollutants into the bay, which we think will happen, then that will involve base.DC. And in order to build anything at Point Molate, right now, base.DC has a bay plan, and its bay plan has this area as park. And so it'll require a bay plan amendment, something we think should not happen. We think the bay plan should not be amended. And so we'll be fighting to protect the current bay plan as it exists. But just so people understand, there's a 100-foot jurisdiction, you know, and that doesn't cover everything.
Someone points out here, the United States has 10 protected areas known as national seashores and 3 known as national lake shores, which are public lands operated by the National Park Service, an agency of the Department of the Interior. National seashores and lake shores are coastal areas federally designated by Congress as being of natural and recreational significance. As a preserved area, all of the national lake shores are on Lakes Michigan and Superior, and 9 of the 10 national seashores are on the Atlantic Ocean, including 2 on the Gulf of Mexico. Point Reyes is the only national seashore on the Pacific coast. While all of these protected sites have extensive beaches for recreation, they extend inland to include other natural resources like wetlands and marshes, forests, lakes and lagoons and dunes. Many also feature historic lighthouses and estates. So that's sort of a much larger expansion of what was mentioned before.
Yeah, that would be great to have this declared a national seashore. I think that it would fit with what happened at GGNRA over in San Francisco, in case people don't know what we're talking about. They nationalized that area where the Park Presidio was. And that's a wonderful area, and it'd be great if we could be linked to it, adopted by it, or in some way sister to it. That'd be terrific. But where we are now, if we can get federal, state, or regional intervention to keep this as a park, we'd welcome any one of it.
It says, are you trying to purchase Point Molate and turn it over to EBRPD?
The East Bay Regional Park District.
Land can participate.
Yeah, I didn't hear the last part of what you said.
Maybe Trust for Public Land can participate?
Yes. Who wrote that question?
Todd Jersey?
Okay. Well, in any event, yeah, we are reaching out to lots of NGOs and state and federal and other organizations that have historically been involved in this kind. Trust that we have done that, and we've gotten a lot of enthusiastic response to actually move forward. The purchases that would probably be an umbrella concept for what we're trying to do. A better way to put it would be we're seeking to buy the whatever rights that the casino developers acquired over Point Molate, and whatever rights the current actual housing developer that's proposing this housing development acquire those rights, such that we would then be the owner of those rights, and then we can settle all the lawsuits and have this move forward. So in a sense, it's an acquisition. In another sense, it's a settlement of lawsuits, but both will happen at the same time.
Okay. Is Save the Bay partnering with you in your lawsuit?
Save the Bay has been supporting us, but they're fighting down on the peninsula, so they haven't been active at the moment, but they are one of the supporters.
What can a non-Richmond resident do to help?
Okay, we want you to think about this the way the eagles and the osprey think about it. There's just land. The way the Ohlone think about it, there's just land. Yes, it's in Richmond, and we want this for Richmond. And Richmond people will be able to go out there and ride bicycles and do everything. But it's a regional facility, and everybody can help. So I'm going to go over the websites again, and they'll tell you how you can get involved. There are 2 that you should pay attention to. One is let me get them up. One is the Point Molate Alliance, and that's www.ptmolate Alliance, that's PTMOLATE Alliance, ALLIANCE, no punctuation between Point Molate Alliance.org. And the other one is eastshorepark.org, East Shore Park, one word, .org. And either way, you'll get in touch with us. If you want to do a quick one, you can send an email to CESP manager, that's one word, CESP manager, at eastshorepark.org. And our manager, Roberta Wynn, who's the manager over at CESP, she's a magnificent, brilliant woman who has been putting together so much of this. She'll be right on top of it and get back to you and tell you how you can help. If you have funds and you can donate for the operation, if you're a very wealthy person that is talking about donating in the area of millions, I'll give you my personal phone number and we can see about hooking you up with our efforts to raise the necessary money. Anybody wants to reach me, my last name is Cheasty. Just Google me, you'll find my law office and we'll get back to you right away. But if you're looking to just help us in the ordinary running of things and paying for the bills of the lawyering and filing of costs and all of the everyday things that you have to do to carry on a battle like this, help us out, make a donation. That would be greatly appreciated. I'm not here to steal donations from the League of Women Voters, which is the most worthy organization in the world, but we're out there doing the work and fighting the good fight. So we need as much help as we can get.
And someone wrote here in response to a question, you don't have to be a resident of Richmond to help preserve Point Molate. You can speak to our city council during public speaking and open forum. Richmond City Council meetings are held on Tuesdays. Go to the City of Richmond website, search for the current city council agendas.
That's true. And sure, come and talk to the city council. But if you want to get involved in any way, it's easier if you kind of contact us and let us know. We can give you suggestions about ways to get involved and let you know which days are critical to show up to talk.
So somebody mentions here that maybe this is somebody from one of your organizations, says that we'd be happy if East Bay Park District would help. They have committed $5 million for a park at Point Molate. Also, GGNRA could expand to the East Bay with Point Molate.
Yeah, from your lips to God's ear. Yeah, well, the Park District is committed to this. Not only, I just want to say that all of us have been working on this for decades. And when Whitney Dotson was alive, he was on the CES board, and then he founded the North Richmond Shoreline and Open Space Alliance. We've been working together to get this shoreline open for years. And when he was on the Park District, it was a priority of his. And since then, it's been added to the general plan of the Park District. It's already in the general plan of the Park District. That's why there's funding for it. And we're working with the Park District right now, and our current director, Elizabeth Eccles, is very much in favor of this. So we're meeting with the Park District and talking to them about what to do, and we're working with them already. And they need to get more involved and take a leadership role, but they're already leaning in and stepping forward.
Great.
I noticed
Okay, maybe.
Could I bring up one that David Helvarg, who is the co-chair of the Point Molate Alliance, put in, that there's money coming out of the federal government, and there are funds that are going to come out in the near future for the Lands and Waters Trust. When they allowed the drilling in the Gulf, there was supposed to be money set aside for preservation and restoration. And those funds Congress has been more or less misappropriating to other things. And now finally a bill got passed last year that will revert those monies back to the preservation and park creation and waterfront uses that it's supposed to have been created for. And thanks, David, for reminding us about that. There's also in the chat, there's Point Molate Alliance. It's actually the linkage is there, and so is the eastshorepark.org. So you can find them. You don't have to take my rattling them out.
Maybe it would be a good time now, if anybody wants to ask a question verbally, you can unmute yourself and raise your hand, and we'd be happy to take further questions that way.
In the meantime, there's one more thing that says, if Elizabeth Echoes is involved, have her speak to Nancy Skinner and Buffy Wicks to push state legislation to convert this to a parkland only.
Yeah, that's a good thing to point out. I would say that our reception by the staff at Nancy Skinner's office has been reasonable, and we're still working with them, and the same thing with Assemblywoman Buffy Wicks. But I would love to see the senator get directly involved with this. She has this idea, I think, originally, or maybe a standoffish idea that housing is so important that housing anywhere and everywhere is what needs to happen. That's not true. We don't want sprawl housing. We want infill housing. And we want housing where there's already infrastructure. And we don't want to have Richmond saddled with something that's going to cost $300 million just to put in the plumbing necessary to support this. And the more housing you have, the more plumbing you need, and the more, so it's like a vicious cycle. You could probably do the restoration of Winehaven Village with doing an on-site treatment without all of that infrastructure. So we think that focusing on the housing, Richmond has tons of land where this can happen. And the mayor, instead of wasting his time trying to steal the shoreline from the people, could go downtown and start working with local developers to develop housing that people can afford and people need in Richmond, where there's already infrastructure. It's time for that. And it's time to recognize that Richmond has needs, and stop trying to pretend that the solution is to substitute a brand new rich population for the existing population by gentrifying Richmond. It's a stupid idea.
It does seem kind of backwards. Somebody's offered to call the senator. You see that on there. You could, Todd Jersey.
Okay, Todd, can you reach out to me when this is over and we can talk about what we've done so far, and give me, I mean, I've known Nancy Skinner since we were both on city councils together, like back when Abe Lincoln was in office. It seems a long time ago. But yeah, we sort of came up together. But yeah, if you have a way to do that, I'll give you my phone number, 510-701-4321. That's 510-701-4321, blast off.
So we haven't had any volunteers on the hands up. It doesn't look like.
Okay, well, if we have no more questions, we can close the meeting. And it's, I think, very productive meeting. Thank you, everybody, for your wonderful comments, your questions, and your great presentation, Robert. We very much appreciate it. And bravo.
Thank you. Carol, can I close with a thought?
Absolutely.
The East Shore State Park, now the McLaughlin East Shore State Park, didn't happen alone. There were people who worked really hard in leadership on making it happen. But the reality is that it was done by millions of people. And I say that in all honesty. It took the voters to vote the bond measures. It took people in city, and there were 6 city governments that were involved with that, and 2 county governments involved with that, and 2 congressional districts, and 2 different park districts, 1 regional and 1 state. Way more complicated than Richmond. But Richmond is unique in making things difficult. So we can do this in Richmond. And there are great, great volunteers. There are the people who have stepped up. I mentioned David Helvarg, who's the founder of Blue Frontier, and Pam Stello and Jeannie Quartz, BK Williams, people who have been involved like Whitney Dotson, community members, Tay and the Richmond Rides, Tony Wright, the soccer king. I mean, there's so many great people that are stepping up, and I'm going to skip too many of them to mention everybody, and please forgive me for that. But we are hundreds of people involved in this, and join us. There's room for everybody. In fact, anybody who wants to step up and solve this problem, I'll sit back and peel grapes because I'm happy to give you the credit. We just want the job done. We want to do the right thing so that when your great grandkids and everybody else's great grandkids look at this, they'll know we had the opportunity, we recognize it, and it's not going to be, Grandpa, you knew and you didn't do anything about it? That'd be the worst thing to hear. So that we can make this happen, all of us together. And I'm awed by the people who are stepping up. It's just wonderful to see the talent level and the commitment. It's just awe-inspiring. Richmond rocks. There's so many talented people in Richmond. I can't believe how many talented people. They just awe me every day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.